Hi everybody, today I'm going to be talking about Lonesome Dove by McMurdy, followed by The White Luck Warrior by Baker. Lonesome Dove by McMurdy was published in the 80s. I'll put the exact year on the screen. This book is said to have revolutionized the Western genre in taking some of the more formulaic tropes and plot structures that preceded it and transforming them into an epic adventure, an epic journey that is heavily thematic. And this book has been influential on many authors outside the genre, including Stephen King and George R.R. Martin. Now, keep in mind, I am not well-read when it comes to Westerns. I've only read books that I think would be considered more revisionist Western stories, or books that critique the genre in some ways. So, for example, books by McCarthy, I would say maybe fit this less formulaic type of Western novel, and Butcher's Crossing by John Williams, which is a critique of those who romanticize the journey out west, that journey of discovery. Now in Lonesome Dove, we are starting out in the location of Lonesome Dove, which is in southern Texas, close to the Texas-Mexico border. And we are following a couple of retired Texas Rangers, Gus and Call, who are our main protagonists in the story, and a number of other men who live in the town who are either very young and inexperienced, or a couple that are more experienced. We also have this prostitute there in the town named Lorena, who is leading a pretty miserable life, doing her job there. She's accepted as the town prostitute, the town whore, and everything changes when a man named Jake Spoon comes to town. Jake Spoon is also a retired Texas Ranger. He knew Gus and Call from back in the day, and he ends up planting seeds of hope in Call and Gus to make this journey up to Montana to herd cattle from southern Texas to Montana. That is the quest journey of this book, if you will, and also to plant seeds of hope in Lorena to leave her miserable life in Lonesome Dove and go to San Francisco. And she believes Jake Spoon is going to be the one to help her get to her destination. So this is what this whole entire story starts out as. The first half of the book takes its time establishing the characters with a good sprinkle of fun humor, and it also establishes the setting, the time period, the culture. Then I would say towards the midpoint of the book, around that point, that's when we start getting some pretty intense action. We have some heart-pounding antagonistic scenes with American Indians. We also have brutal weather conditions and environmental factors that afflict our characters. So it is an intense journey that has so many things you wouldn't see coming, so many challenges along the way, so much loss. The action scenes in this book got my heart pounding. It actually got me sweating a couple of times. I felt so invested, I felt so tense through those scenes. This book also explores trauma, tragedy, the aftermath of that. And this is a brutal time period reflected in the book on all people, yes, but especially women, and especially people of color. Now, there is quite a bit of racism in this book. The N-word is used. Please be warned about that. Quite a bit of brutality towards women. And yet I think that there was a lot of care and attention into how the aftermath of that played out. The second half of the book does introduce an incredible female character who I absolutely adored, who's a bit older in age, a bit more seasoned, but who has an incredible amount of resilience, heart, and grit. This book is a coming-of-age book, but it's a coming-of-age book that subverts that idea that coming-of-age or a rite of passage on a journey like this is going to make men glorified heroes at the end of the day. And also, as way of that, I think it also explores masculinity, the dark sides of that, as well as maybe some positive aspects of that as well. I wouldn't say it's all gloom when it comes to that theme, but it does present some critiques of that, especially at that time, considering the way of the world and the way women were treated and the way men thought at that time. This book does not shy away from death. There is grief, there is unrequited love, there is friendship. The dialogue is impeccable, and I would say this story is almost in equal parts bitter and sweet, with maybe just a little more emphasis on the bitter. I was a little put off by the last line of the book, but I had a great discussion in my Discord about it, and how if you could see that last line in the context of one of the themes I mentioned before. I won't really give that away in case you really want to go into this without knowing, but I really loved this book. It gave me a book hangover, and I was already coming off another book hangover, which is the second book I'm going to be talking about here. Now to talk about White Luck Warrior by R. Scott Baker, Book 2 in Aspect Emperor and Book 5 in the Second Apocalypse series. This is my favorite book in all of the Second Apocalypse so far. I discussed this with Philip Chase on his channel with spoilers, and he agreed with me that this is also his favorite book in the second apocalypse so far. This book has the most unhinged cast of characters I've ever read about, the motliest of crews. There's a character in this book that reminds me of a combination of Hannibal Lecter and Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. It's been ages since I've seen that movie, so that might not be the best description, but that's what I'm going with for right now. We also have a character that was introduced in book 1, a young adult male character that has been through the most tragic of circumstances, and I just felt for this character because he's put in some very awkward situations. He's constantly trying to figure out if he has any agency or if he's just a puppet being played by some other forces. There's also this whole entire journey of characters with this sad Gandalf sort of figure. There's a lot of Lord of the Rings nods in this series, and Philip and I talked about that in our discussion. But that whole journey was intense. It was wild. There's also another character perspective that's introduced as well. This whole book kind of explores the fantasy idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And in this case, I don't think that could be trusted at all. But another thing that this explores is motivation. Not only how certain characters can have hidden motivations, but how motivations can hide themselves in people, where they're driven by motives or instincts that they're not even aware of. And a lot of it leads to maybe lack of altruism. There is some discussion of that. But also in this series is the concept of free will, if we have any or not. What I find interesting about that is that we have this sect of people in this series called the Dunyain. And the Dunyain are these grand master manipulators. They can read every micro expression of your face. They can always see a step ahead of a person. They know exactly what makes a person tick, and therefore they know exactly what to do, what to say, how to move the chessboard pieces in place so that those people can do what they want. So there's this idea that whatever a person does might be already set in motion from manipulations from the Dunyain. But at the same time, there is so much conversation in this book about certainty and about how humans are completely irrational if they believe that certainty exists and cling to such simple notions of certainty. So I find it interesting that we have, on the one hand, this idea that certainty is an illusion. It's only believed in by foolish, childish people. This notion of worshiping in hopes of being certain about something. And then on the other hand, we have this idea that people are manipulated to the point where they have no free will, and that every action they do is really part of a larger plot that is already set in motion. So I find that an interesting juxtaposition. Maybe these two ideas are not at odds with each other, but to me, they do seem slightly at odds with each other. There's also some conversation about the metaphysics in this world and whether gods themselves can be fallible, whether gods can make mistakes. And I found that conversation interesting as well. I really love how the themes were set in motion in this book, how you'll get a certain theme in one storyline, switch to another storyline and see that theme in a different context. I know that's not really a new type of way of exploring theme. I mean, that's very common in books, right? But I really loved the way it came through in this book, where I could really trace it very easily. Themes of self-defeat and motherhood, also memories and how that is a construction of self or not, manipulation, which I already mentioned, all these different interesting questions. And this is such a fascinating world where it has this ancient epic feel to it, yet the characters feel so convincing. They feel 3D. It doesn't feel like you're reading something that's ancient and that you feel so far removed from these characters of another time and place. I really felt immersed in every setting, in every psychological exploration that these characters endure. That's one of my favorite things about this series, is the psychology that's explored with the characters. I love that. I also love the philosophical questions. So that's what I'm loving so far. And even though this is a very dark series, I've been having conversations with people lately about how you can't have something that's very, very dark and bleak and hopeless without having some counterpoint to that. And I do think that there are winning moments for certain characters. Now, whether those will stay winning moments going into the next book, I have some doubts about that, but it was still exciting. It was so intense. It was so gripping. I had the biggest book hangover when I finished this book. I had already started Lonesome Dove right before I finished this book. I was about a quarter into Lonesome Dove when I finished this book, and Lonesome Dove felt quite cozy in comparison to this book. But wow, I just had a moment. I had some days there where I thought, what is reading? How do I read? And then Lonesome Dove obviously also got to me in a very deep way. So I'm still thinking very deeply about both books. And that's all I read in the month of June, or all I finished, I should say. I also continue to make progress on Peril's Gate by Jenny Wirtz. That's book 6 in Words of Light and Shadow, and that is a beast of a book. It is so big, and it takes so long to read. So I'm reading that right now. I am also reading Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. This is my first time reading Crime and Punishment or that author, and this is part of a buddy read project that my mom invited me to. So I'm visiting family right now, which is what the setting is here, and we're reading that alongside each other. We're reading out loud to each other and discussing it as we go on, because it's my mom's favorite book of all time. So it's been very special. We went to Barnes & Noble and we got a whole bunch of editions, and we looked through the different translations to figure out which one we thought was the best. We actually went with 2 different translations. I'll put them on the screen. And I am reading one, my mom's reading the Penguin one. So it's a little weird to follow along with a different translation when the other person's reading out loud from a different translation. But it's also kind of giving me insight into the different word choices, and I don't know, it's an interesting way to approach it, I guess. And I'm still getting a lot out of the book so far. We're in part 2, or about to finish part 2. Before I close out the video, I want to go ahead and shout out a couple of collabs I did in the month of July. I had the pleasure of being on Brian's channel, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and had a fantastic discussion with Brian. Just instantly hit it off with him. I just had such a wonderful time getting to know him more. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be a guest on that series. Then I also got the pleasure of being a guest on Words and Times channel, Jonathan's channel. We did a collab with Josh from Red Fury Books on ranking our Dark Tower series experience. So we ranked the Dark Tower series books by Stephen King. And you could watch that video over on Jonathan's channel. It's totally spoiler-free. I had the best time, and I was elated. I was elated after that discussion. And if you watch the whole video, you'll find out why. So please check that video out. And then I also had a Why Read episode with Abby Salter, who is one of my longtime dear friends here on BookTube, and Hannah Blackwell, who's a fantastic person and wonderful channel as well. We got into some interesting discussions, and I hope that you check that out. Check out the replay if you didn't check it out live. And I'm hoping to schedule more Why Read episodes in the fall. It's been a little slowed down for summer for various reasons. I've also been committing a little bit more to doing some artwork, so I guess that's eaten up some of my reading time. I already mentioned the wonderful discussion I had on Philip Chase's channel on White Luck Warrior. So that about concludes my month of July. Please let me know how your July went. What was your favorite book? Thank you so much for watching my video. Please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me a lot. And check out the links in the description if you want to connect with me in the fireside or any other such thing. So thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.